realistically, the stuff that's right with the world doesn't need the exploration necessarily. I mean, we've got Miranda July for that.
Welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I'm here with Tom Roberge from New Directions, and we're back this week after talking about independent bookstores to talk about Project Hieroglyph, which we'll explain in a second, read some letters from our listeners that got sent in, and talk about a few other random things. But we'll start with the Project Hieroglyph, which is an article that you sent to me from the BBC about Neal Stephenson's new project, in which they're trying to write stories that envision science fiction in the future in positive ways. Do you want to explain this?
Yeah, it's a little strange because the this is in the BBC magazine, which I guess has more pictures or whatever. So they show all these pictures, but they're from movies.
Yeah,
movies that they show pictures for. But what they're actually talking about is a book. A collection of stories or something like that.
Yeah.
Stories collected in a book entitled Hieroglyph will release on September 9th, which I assume is in the UK. I don't know. This is HarperCollins in the UK. I assume it'll be published in the US. I have no idea because some of these people are from the US.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's basically this idea that Neal Stephenson saw a trend in his own writing that was very bleak and dystopian and that sort of thing. And he didn't really think about it, and then he went to a conference, and people were talking about it, blah, 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 and from talking to people about it, they spawned Project Hieroglyph, which, quote, seeks to bring science fiction writers and scientists together to learn from and influence each other, and in turn, the future, which in itself doesn't have any of the optimism or, positivity that we're referencing, but the more you read this article, the more it's obvious that it says down here, negative visions of the future as perpetuated in pop culture are limiting people's ability to dream big or think outside the box. Science fiction, he says, should do more.
There is, just to add to this too, there is hieroglyph.asu.edu is the website that they have some of the stories from the book on there. They have an ad for the book, and other conversations, information about it, so on and so forth. So even without, even if you don't have the book, you can actually see what this is by going to that website, which I'll include on the post about it. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to me because there is I've been sort of obsessed for years with all the dystopian books, both from not necessarily the young adulty Hunger Games ones, although I do like those movies, but the fact that a lot of more traditional literary authors started writing these kind of books, Lydia Millet's new book, which is a young adult one, is a post-apocalyptic sort of thing. There's the Margaret Atwood trilogy. Even Gary Steingart's book is envisioning a future that's not so positive. And so I've always been for the past few years, been reading a bunch of those and kind of looking at the different ways that they envision the downfall, whatever the downfall might be that makes everything all fucked up, but then also how people react to it afterwards. But it is true that I can't think of one single example of a book that I've read where it's the future is great, we've got all this new technology and everything's fantastic. But I do think that when I was a kid and I read science fiction, it was more of that, that there'd be spaceships and you'd fly around and things would be super cool. And instead now our future visions are things are going to be so shitty. We're going to be hunting children in the woods and making them kill each other every year.
Well, I've always thought of science fiction as a sort of tool to analyze contemporary society. I don't know that I always considered it, an actual imagining of the future. And I think there are certainly science fiction writers who and movie makers and artists and whatever who are genuinely concerned with what the future might look like.
Right.
But the more interesting ones to me are the ones who are using it as as a tool to explore what's going on with, contemporary. And realistically, the stuff that's right with the world doesn't need the exploration necessarily. I mean, we've got Miranda July for that. She can do that, right? We need to explore all of the, problems with society. And this is why 1984 is so brilliant. And
right.
Fahrenheit 451 and all of these classical sort of sci-fi dystopian novels are actually talking about things that were happening, in and around the times that they were written. And anyone who doesn't appreciate that, well, they're just part of the problem, I think. But so I think it's kind of odd to turn sci-fi in this project into a sort of think tank, if you will, for the future, as opposed to what it has traditionally been.
Yeah, I think one of the quotes, I'm just going to read this to back up that point exactly, which I thought that stood out to me, and you're going to know exactly what I'm going to say here. And I thought was weird. It's from Braden Allenby, a Project Hieroglyph participant and professor of engineering, ethics, and law at ASU, which I assume is Arizona State, but
it is. Yes.
Okay. His is his quote: "Why do we end up with the technologies we do? Why are people working on, for example, invisibility cloaks? Well, it's Harry Potter, right? That's where they saw it," he says. "Why are people interested in handheld devices that allow you to diagnose diseases anywhere in the world? Well, that's what Mr. Spock can do. Why can't we?" Which I think is kind of ludicrous. But especially the invisibility cloak thing. No one ever thought of that before Harry Potter. But
right.
Their weird thing
the
of
Invisible Man.
Yeah.
I think
this has been around for well before Harry Potter. But the idea of it seems like they're looking at this interplay between what physics can do and the ideas that they can create, which can be sort of amazing. When there's this thing that came out last year here at the university, actually, where they inscribe something on a particle of light, something like that. That's absurd to even be able to understand or to wrap your mind around, and that can sort of spark ideas. The interplay between that and what you can do with fiction to envision something that can then in turn inspire physicists to be oh, well, maybe we do have a solution for that. I mean, it seems valuable, but it also makes this book sound like something I never want to read.
Well, yes, I think considering both of our tastes, it's not a book for us. I thought the more interesting sort of takeaway from this for me was whether or not these people have a sort of sense of delusion of grandeur, or am I just being cynical, which is entirely possible, that they think this way of writing books will somehow change anything.
Yeah, no, I think it's a delusion of grandeur. I mean, they are insanely popular writers, but have you read any of the Neal Stephenson books?
But he did Snow
Crash, yeah.
Snow Crash, yes, that one I read.
Yeah, which is fine. I read the one I did not. That's the big one, Cryptonomicon, which I read, which I found kind of interesting. But his whole sort of undercurrent in both of those books is this sort of male protagonist that gets ahead through his libertarian views and being a pure technologist that can do things, and that is very money focused and technology focused. And I always found that fairly disturbing. So I haven't read any of his books since then, because I feel like his ethics are what he's promoting for the world are the Google assholes.
You mean Ayn Rand?
Yeah, essentially Ayn Rand, but a 21st century vision of it. If you're super good at coding, you are the baddest ass there is. And Cryptonomicon is fairly misogynist at the end, and especially where this girl is constantly saving this dude up until the last moment when he finally saves her life and becomes the hero and everyone loves him, and it's kind of sickening. But that's my two-sentence critique of Neal Stephenson's books. But he is insanely popular.
Oh yeah, I mean he's somewhat of a guru in this fiction, in this genre. He's for better or for worse, it seems like he's kind of the heir to Philip K. Dick in terms of the sci-fi writer who addresses big philosophical questions in his work. We may not like where he lands on those issues, but I do think that he's sort of taken that role on. I can't think of anyone else.
Especially with Snow Crash. I think Cryptonomicon has a lot more basis in World War II and that kind of coding and whatchamacallit, what's the word for it? Where you like break code breaking, but there's another term. But anyways, and then his other trilogy is like all set in the 1700s, I believe. So he has a bit of that too, of like the grand philosophical ideas tracing throughout time, which makes him like somewhat broader, I think, than Philip K. Dick in a way. I don't think he's as imaginative either, but no. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, Dick was very. He didn't want to set things in the past. He thought the unknown future was the perfect, playscape to throw his characters into these, situations he dreamed of, in order to tackle the issues he was concerned with, whatever the hell he was obsessed with at any given moment. I don't know that it. Look, I wish this book the loads of success, and I hope more people read this kind of science fiction and think about books as more than passing idle time or learning something about humanity or whatever themselves, but bigger, grander, thousands of years into the future when we're long gone kind of thing. That's cool. It's nice to think about, and a good sci-fi movie will do the same thing, or even a bad one or a bad series like Battlestar Galactica, for all of its cheesiness, was pretty interesting for the way it portrayed some problems of war and ethics and right. Annihilation and all of these sorts of things, and democracy and all of these sorts of things. Yeah. So even towards the end here, I don't know who this guy is, Constantinu.
I was waiting for this. Yeah.
He admits that he's a little skeptical of the project, although he is involved. That somebody convinced him, or somebody's wallet convinced him in the end to participate. And he said that he worried it would, quote, whitewash negative aspects of our reality and be too Pollyanna-ish, which is kind of what I was saying, although I didn't use the Pollyanna reference.
Although I also want to point out that he worked with a guy on a story called Johnny Appledrone versus the FAA about a future in which drones are commonplace and utilized in communication.
Yeah, I hope he wrote the story like 20 years ago, because he's a little behind the time.
I just like Johnny Appledrone. Come on,
that's pretty terrible.
Like that's bad. There was one thing to go back to what you're saying about science fiction reflecting contemporary things. There was, I feel like, a slew of these books and movies and whatnot and dystopian things came out shortly after Obama was elected, and it was almost as if people had this fear that Obama wasn't going to be elected. This is like back on the first time, and that the world was going to continue down the path that had been going with George W. Bush and that sort of direction, and that a lot of this was a reaction to that fear. Like I think that there was various allusions in like the season of 24 that sort of, which I don't even remember really watching that well, but like that sort of alluded to this as if like that had been the predicted outcome, and they're going to use like science fiction or like more that kind of element of stuff, dystopian type of stuff, to like reflect on the current political whatever situation. But then they got lucky.
My other question about all this, and I mean, maybe I'm just blind to some of this, but why is it particularly science fiction that sort of gets saddled with this critique that it's too bleak and also takes on this challenge of creating more optimism? I mean, why don't novels that are set in contemporary America, like, I don't know, Don DeLillo or anybody along these lines, where the portrait they paint of America is just one of paranoia and misery and confusion and inability to communicate and all of that? Why is no one out there saying, "Oh, this is too bleak. We need more hopeful fiction"?
I'm going to really overly simplify and be wrong about this, but in a way, I think it's the people who become the computer entrepreneurs or designers or whatever, and the scientists that tend to read not those books, but read the science fiction books, and that for that reason, like I think the tenor of the article is that those people don't have an optimistic set of ideas that are coming into them to work on their research or whatever. And I think it's because those people are most interested in science fiction that it becomes that thing. But I don't really, I mean, you're right. I don't really know. I don't have a good answer for that. I do think one of the things that was interesting to me in relation to like the Hunger Games in particular was I feel like dystopian stuff has become so commonplace now. Like every few months, there's a new young adult series that's being converted into a set of movies that in which like the future is just messed up. But it's become so like commonplace that you can't. The writers and the directors and everyone has to go. They have to go so far in creating a world that's so awful that these things can become acceptable, like believable in some ways. Where like for the Hunger Games in particular is insane that because it was whatever revolution, they have all these different areas that have been cut up and have to send 2 children to go fight and kill each other in the middle of like a Hunger Games woods. Like how bad does the world have to get for that to be okay? And I feel like back in like the day, like in the 50s or 60s or something, if you included like some of the stuff that's going on today, like drones or whatever, surveillance, like that would have been terrifying enough. But now there's we have to go to such a degree that these dystopian futures are like more bleak than even seems possible, just to be able to make you suspend your disbelief to be able to buy into the general storyline.
This is true. This is very true. And what's shocking to me is that more and more of these books and movies are for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. They really, my daughter loves the Hunger Games, and she's 10. Like, that's just like, her and her brother play Hunger Games sometimes. Like,
That's really, really messed up. Sort of a tangent. Have you ever seen Battle Royale?
No, I haven't, but I know about it.
You should do not let your children watch that one.
Okay.
My God. But it's a version, and this sort of ties into what we're talking about. It's a version of the Hunger Games, very small sort of version of it, but that somehow manages to make sense in this only slightly different world. It's only a slightly different, version of contemporary Japan. And yet it all seems to, it's fucked up what's going on there in the movie, like even the kids who are stuck doing it are like, what the hell's going on? This makes no sense. But, when it's sort of explained, it doesn't seem all that strange. And that's perhaps just as scary as,
yeah,
the idea that, what had to happen for, the parallel reality of the Hunger Games to come into existence. It's like, do you remember when 28 Days Later came? Mm-hmm. That was such a shocking, horrifying, incredibly awesome sci-fi movie because it was just like, we're just going to tweak society just a little bit and watch the mess that we get ourselves into. And
right.
it's incredible, and yeah, instead of going all out into these bizarre, like, what's that movie with Matt Damon where he's like half human and he has to go to Mars where I can't even remember what's going on. It's like a space station. It's a really not a very good movie. Directed by the same guy who did the one with the aliens in South Africa, which died.
Oh, Project 9 or District 9 or whatever it is.
Same director. I can't think of the name of the movie. Anyway, like, yeah, they had to get to this crazy world where, planet Earth is nothing but a giant dust bowl and all the wealthy people live on a rotating space station and don't have any idea what's going on. It's so bizarre. Anyway, I wish I could understand why these sort of conversations tend to exist solely in the sci-fi world, and it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's because so many of the books are so similar to each other, unlike most other types of.
That's true, and they have a category that you can pin things on, whereas like contemporary fiction is just like
it's wide open.
Yeah, it's incredibly ambiguous as to what you could be behind those covers. Speaking of sci-fi things that do deserve an extra plug, I think I'm supposed to do a rant this week, which I'll have to come up with as we talk here, but because I forgot about that. But the best sci-fi thing. Wait, do you like David Fincher?
I'm hit or miss on him.
Okay, there's a BBC, or it's not BBC, it's Channel 4 in the UK show called Utopia. I may have mentioned to you before, but they have 2 6-episode series that have come out so far. The second one just ended like a few weeks ago. And it's a sort of sci-fi in a way thing in which basically these scientists that are affiliated with the government have determined that by 2050 or whatever, there's going to be too many people living on the world. Like that old sort of Malthusian argument that we're going to just deplete all our resources. So they figure out a way to sterilize basically everyone. But it's so there could be just 1 million people on Earth, because that's what the Earth can actually like support, and it'll be a utopia if there's only that, like, or not 1 million, maybe it was 1 billion, I forget what it is, but it's like basically like just one portion of the people that are living on Earth now. But it's one of the most beautiful and amazing TV shows I've ever watched. Like they can swear and do all those kind of things because it's BBC, so it feels very like HBO-ish in that sense. But it's super, super pretty in terms of the colors that they use and the framing of the shots. It's kind of like Gus Van Sant's Elephant, in the way that like the way that it's kind of set up and framed. But it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And they're redoing it for HBO, and David Fincher apparently is the person doing it. Which, yeah. I'm not going to recommend that. I'm going to recommend the UK version right now.
Okay. Yeah. Fincher, I mean, what did he do? He did the Facebook movie, Social Network.
Yeah.
He did Seven.
Gone Girl.
Gone Girl? Did he? Well, it hasn't even come out yet.
It hasn't come out yet, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I really did not like the Facebook movie.
Oh, and Fight Club. Which I do not like.
I didn't like that either.
Yeah. Yeah, fuck him. The UK version is awesome, and you can download it all in various illegal ways. I think you can actually watch it legally on their site if you just use a VPN through the UK, so that they think you're in the UK. But it's great. It's really great. Anyway, so we also got some letters.
Yes, which I'm going to start with. So after the last podcast in which we ranted about Amazon and blah, 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 I got an email. We both got an email from Lance Edmonds, who works at Posman Books. They have a couple of branches in New York City, but the one he works at is in the Chelsea Market, which is literally a block away from the New Directions office. And, sometimes I go over there and we talk. And he loves New Directions books and the kind of books we publish in general. And so he listened to what we had to say, and the first thing, well, it's pretty obvious. Here we go. So a note, this is from Lance. It says, a note on chat's hypothetical divisions of readers. 10 million people who need books and 100 million who want them like they shoes and toothpaste and everything else. So he says, we'll take today, for example. It's Saturday, and I'm going to work at Postman's Book in Chelsea Market. It's going to be super busy with most people, tourists, buying calendars and stickers and scented erasers and postcards and tote bags and pouches because we sell them in a bookstore. There's a Kickerland, I don't know what that is, store on 6th Avenue, but we outsell them in the products we stock because the books are baked. People love to love bookstores. The music, the vibe, the intellectual street cred, who knows, which is what you were getting to. Mm-hmm. Others, the 100 million, will come in and buy a couple of pop nonfiction paperbacks, a copy of The Leftovers because they saw the show on TV, bemoan the weight and the price of the Goldfinch, grab an armload of children's books and leave. These two groups are the healthy people in our insurance plan. Then a couple of you guys will walk in, or maybe you guys before you'd seen it all. Most of that 10 million is probably girls, which might be true. All the rest is a support system that allows me to stock hundreds of books that you would like. It allows me to stock every open letter book and ND book. I think books are more than a product or a business. I think they're wholly essential, and the numbers are growing. Somebody's going to open a Time for Everything today because of me. I'm going to sell a pile of Augustus to everyone in Europe who inexplicably read Stoner this year. Postman Books is aggressively looking to open more and more stores. The higher-ups have visions of many more in Manhattan and high-traffic urban areas. He says he's convinced them that the 10 million is a group worth courting. And one of the nice things about really good books is that there are not very many of them, maybe a couple thousand. And I thought this was the best part in here. Yeah. It's very close. It's very easy to stock almost all of the literature that I think is worth the shit without investing too much space or money. Chelsea is the mold. Hopefully we'll see dozens of smaller, super curated stores in the post Barnes & Noble book world. And so I wrote back and just some general things. And he says, I tell all my employees that we need to have all the books they like to recommend in stock. And this is pretty easy to accomplish. We forget within the vastness of libraries and bookstores how few books we actually read. I mean, us, not the average guy or gal who buys 2 books a year. I mean, when I'm 40 books a year, I think there are 3 types of books that must be stocked. staff picks, classics, and bestsellers. Everything else belongs to the realm of libraries, and this is where bookstores are getting themselves in trouble. You can't sell only books and have a large general bookstore anymore. It's unfortunate. I do like his, and thank you to Lance.
Yeah, thanks, Lance.
I do like the idea that, the staff picks are such a, not just, having a staff pick wall or something like that, but stocking, literally any book that you would recommend to somebody should always be in store. And carrying all of those things because of who's on staff and because it's curated, makes it so much easier to sell books to people. And then, like he says, you have the bestsellers, and then you have the classics. And it's true. Why else would you go to that particular bookstore if not for those particular reasons, right?
Right, exactly. That was, I may have mentioned this, but when I worked at Schiller Books in Grand Rapids, that was our setup, was that each person was assigned a section. And for that section, you had to order books that you thought that section needed or that you supported. So you had to find out something in particular about that. So I had business when I first started there, and I didn't know anything about business books, but slowly but surely figured out ones that we carried more of because they were ones I thought would be more useful or sell better. But you're allowed to do it for any section, which is why, because of the group of people that we ended up with at that time working at the store, the fiction section was probably better than anyone in America, next to City Lights, because we were all very heavy readers of a certain type, and there's all of those books there. But I think that is having, what's exciting about the staff picks to me, aside from just their placement and the fact that you have someone behind it, it creates a sort of investment between the employee and the store itself, that they're involved in that, in the kind of the way that the store, what it represents, what it brings in, how it supports these books. I think that's really important.
Oh, absolutely. Otherwise you might as well be Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I like the post Barnes & Noble world too.
Yeah. Anyway, so thank you to Lance. I've got another one here from Douglas Singleton, who works at McNally Jackson. He and I used to work there together. He's been there a long time. He's also a writer, and he does all sorts of things. I don't remember exactly. He wrote in, we talked about this, how you should watch Seinfeld's Comedians Drinking Coffee, and you wrote back. And then he said, I'd love to be on the podcast. I listen to you guys as I prepare the weekend wholesale orders on Friday mornings. I have to start early, and it's such a partially consuming task. That it's good to have something you can engage and move in and out of and rewind through. And where your head is, books, or wants to be, sports. So to me, that just proves to Nate in particular that, look, people do like us talking about sports. So,
that's the main takeaway there.
Yes, exactly.
we need to include that as an element.
Right. And then lastly, and we'll talk more about this in a second, reiterate from last podcast, but Patrick Smith, who is one of our judges in the World Cup of Literature, and I think reviews books for your website.
Yep. Yeah.
He lives in Vermont.
Yep.
Yes. So he writes, no thoughts on Bolaño, but I would love it if you guys did a follow-up on Tom's idea of doing a similar podcast for the new Dennis Johnson book, The Laughing Monsters. It'd be a nice motivation for him to read it instead of vaguely thinking about reading it for years and blah, blah, blah. And he also says, Chad, you really, really, really should read Train Dreams. I've only read that and Jesus' Son with Hangman sitting on my shelf, but Train Dreams is just about a perfect novella. It takes no time at all.
I will. I liked Jesus' Son, but I didn't, at the time when I read it, there was too many other things with people worshiping it that I just sort of got turned off. My fault.
I didn't read Jesus' Son for, I don't know, maybe 10 years until after it came out. I waited. I was, the love for it was a little much.
Yeah. Just so you know, I have Jesus, what is the name of his new book?
The Laughing Monsters.
Yeah, I've got it set, so I'm going to buy it for my audiobook when it comes out, because I'm part of the Audible thing where you get a new one every month. And I'll listen to the audiobook of that, and we should do a reading group for that one, a reading book podcast, because that'll be easy for me to do and doable. But the other thing is, and I mentioned this to you before we started recording, but looking to the future of this, too, of other books to include, The Mad and the Bad by Jean-Patrick Manchette, that came out from New York Review of Books in July, maybe, earlier this year. Anyways, it's a book that you're really excited to read because you really like Fatale and him in general. and we both have copies of it. And I found out that there's a graphic novel version called Run Like Crazy, Run Like Hell that's coming out in January. So I'm going to get that too, and we'll do a podcast on that as well in January. That's way in the future.
We're going to wait for all that time. All right.
Well, I mean, if I could get the other one sooner, but I think it would be interesting to talk about both.
Okay. This would require me reading a graphic novel, which I've never done. So.
If you don't want to read the graphic novel, you don't have to. I'll read both of them though.
All right. But yes, we should definitely. So that's The Mad and the Bad by Manchette. We'll do Dennis Johnson's The Laughing Monsters
in November, right? Because that's when it comes out. Or no, it comes out in October.
I think it's the end of October. But sooner than both of those, we're going to do Bolaño's Little Lumpen Novelita, which published this week. So you have a copy. Have you read it?
No, I'm going to start it after I finish the things I have this weekend.
Yeah, it won't take you long.
No, I know. It's super short.
But anyway, I think we told people we'd do it in a couple weeks, the week of the 22nd. Second? Yes.
Yeah, we said we'd record it on the 24th.
Okay.
Or 25th. So if you have a question or a comment, get it in by the 24th.
Point being, yes, email us at the email address, which will be on the webpage for this, or if you're really paying attention right now, it is 3% podcast, all spelled out, at gmail.com. And tell us your thoughts about Bolaño, your questions about this book, or whatever. Or if you disagree with us entirely. That would be great. So, what else? Oh, rants and raves. I'm on rant. And
You're supposed to rave.
I'm on rave, and I totally had prepared for a rant.
Well, you do a rant, and let's count my Utopia thing as my rave. I love that show. Like I've been saving the last episode for a week now because I just don't want it to be over. I think it's beautiful, and I think everyone needs to see it.
Well, now I've got a rant and a rave because I was trying to think of one in the midst here. So they're both very short. My rant. So look, this is like white people problems, but so I live in a fairly nice neighborhood in Brooklyn. It is not terribly expensive, but it is a very picturesque neighborhood, shall we say. It's also on the cheaper side in terms of filming, apparently, because there are productions, I don't know, once a month I'll see one somewhere in the neighborhood, filming an episode of God knows what, Girls or Boardwalk Empire, I think has been filmed around here. Anyway, usually they're small, they're in and out, they don't bother you, it's no big deal, right? The past 3 days, around the corner from me, there has been what must be the largest production I've ever seen on the side streets of Brooklyn. We're talking tractor trailers lining several blocks full of rigging and all kinds of equipment, with one of the cafes in the area closed so that it can serve as a green room, and the production assistants posted on corners, telling everyone they can't walk down the streets, redirecting traffic, using police to do this. Coming home last night, they told us we couldn't cross the street. We had to wait a minute. I was just like, you got to be fucking kidding me. The problem is I don't understand. The idea is that it's good for the city of New York, right?
Right.
That they've paid to film here. I have a hard time believing that the money that goes into the city's coffers trickles down to, I don't know, fixing potholes or painting new bike lanes or anything like that. I really don't see that that's happening. And on top of that, these people, they come in and they act like they own the town. And they force people to move their cars with, pretty much no authority. They make it so you can't walk down this block, so you have to go around extra blocks if you want to just go to the deli on the corner. God, I feel bad for those people who live on that block because it was lit up like it was daytime at midnight last night. And I just feel like, and the production assistants, of course, think they are the most important people in the world, and fuck them.
They filmed part of Spider-Man 2 here for a week or 10 days. And it was a huge deal because it was right downtown, so it was fairly inconvenient. You couldn't drive anywhere, and it's a much different scale, obviously. But what was funny is that afterwards, they were endless articles in the newspaper and on TV about how the store owners on that street lost like tons and tons of money, and they'd been promised like to get payments from the film company for their business being shut down literally for 10 days, but they ended up getting like a couple $100 each.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah, it was really bad. So it's like, no, we never want to do this again.
Yeah, no. It doesn't seem like a good idea.
No.
But I do want to give one little rave here, and I wish I could speak more knowledgeably about this, but I can't because I haven't seen it yet because it comes out today in theaters. But there's a new documentary called Last Days in Vietnam, which is about exactly that. What does it say here? During the chaotic final weeks of the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese army closes in on Saigon, and panicked South Vietnamese people desperately attempt to escape. On the ground, American soldiers and diplomats confront the same moral quandary, whether to obey White House orders to evacuate U.S. citizens only or to risk treason and save the lives of as many South Vietnamese citizens as they can. I'm sure you've seen the footage of the helicopter leaving the roof of the embassy in Saigon with hanging from... years ago, I had a friend of a friend was he was half Vietnamese, and he was a baby being taken out on that helicopter.
Wow.
I came to find out. Anyway, I don't know about you, but the Vietnam War I find endlessly fascinating. I can't wait to see this documentary.
That's really cool.
From what I've heard so far, it's supposed to be amazing, and I can't wait to see it.
That sounds really cool. We were in DC last weekend for the National Book Festival that had a huge event for our 1,000 Forests and One Acorn book, and I was able to take the kids to like the Smithsonian, the American History one, and the Air and Space one. In the American History one, there was a bunch of stuff about civil rights, but also about the Vietnam War, and it was one of those like intriguing moments where I was like, I really should read or watch more stuff about all of this. Like I haven't in years, just because for whatever reason, and it was pretty interesting. I think it would be great.
Yeah,
check that out.
The best thing to me about Netflix is all these random documentaries on things that I never think about ever, and it's like, oh, hey, let's explore Lyndon Johnson's presidency.
Yeah, exactly. Somehow my daughter ended up watching at her mom's house with her mom, supposedly, although this could be a lie. One of those like conspiracy theory 9/11 movies that's on Netflix.
Oh, that's not.
I was like, why did you do that? And she's like, oh, I wanted to see how stupid it was. And I was like, you do realize it's all crap? She's like, yeah, it was just dumb. Like, okay. I don't know why you did that. But anyway, I think that's all I've got for this week.
All right. Sure, something else in the world of publishing will come up.
Definitely. Oh, one thing I was going to say, we should have, I talked to her about this when I was down there briefly, and I can email, but this woman, Eleanor, I always want to say Steele because that's her old name, it's Billington, I think is her new last name, but she was one of the people that works at the NEA, and I think that as a balance in some ways to some of the things we do, to have her on to talk about nonprofit publishing and funding would be kind of interesting. She's also funny as shit. And she wants to do a rant. She wants to do a rant about how much she likes butts.
Really?
I believe so.
Okay.
I don't know what she's got, but she's generally extremely funny. So I'd be willing to bet it would be entertaining. But I think that doing something about nonprofit publishing would be good.
All right.
With her.
Yes. Well, I mean, I am clearly no expert on nonprofit publishing. You obviously know a lot more, so the two of you probably have a lot to say, and I can ask stupid questions.
That's perfect, though, because I don't think anyone understands it outside of when you're involved in the field necessarily,
right?
Or like what the different kind of aspects to it are. But they just also had that book come out, so she could talk about that too. The what was it called? The Art of Empathy. I think that's what it's called. It's got like 19 essays on translation and publishing.
Okay.
So there's like another reason for her to do it too. We could have Amy as the person in charge, Amy Stoles, but I think that she's less likely to be able to do it because of the nature of being the director. Like She can't say things. Whereas I think Eleanor can sort of say some things.
Yes. I mean, yeah.
We also have to have them talk. Their offices were on Pennsylvania Avenue at the old post office. So which is fairly cool. You know, you never, yeah, you would never have gone down and saw to visit Ira there, but his office there, where their offices were when he was there, were bought by Trump and are becoming like a Trump suite and hotel. So like Ira's office is going to be the presidential suite.
Really?
Yep. They got moved somewhere. I don't even know where their new offices are, but like,
Hey, didn't they just move before that?
I think I think that is this move. The same. I think we're talking about the same one because it was a little while ago. But for a while, like when I was there, like Donald Trump would be walking around checking out the space every so often.
Okay.
Which is just bizarre and kind of depressing because that building is super cool. But anyways, okay. Well, I will talk to you later.
All right.
I'm gonna go talk to the student. All the new kids are here, so all that shit's starting up again.
Sounds not fun at all.
Well, one of them, so far it's been okay. Oh shit, that was one thing I was going to include. I'll include it on the email. But there's one of the students is doing Spanish, and he's looking for Spanish science fiction books that need to be translated. I'll just write it into the post. But there's a woman that's doing her PhD is like ABD or whatever, and she's going to be working with us for like the year doing marketing stuff. So it's actually pretty cool. Now we have a new employee essentially for free.
Sweet.
Yeah, I know. It's like oh, we could do all these millions of things I never get around to doing. So we will be proficient for once. But anyways, okay. Well, I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.